Vasudeva. Janmadya Setam Vajaritartachate Swabhigya Swarat.
Tene Brahma Hridaya Adhikavaye Muyanti Yatsurayaha.
Tenne Brahma Hridaya Adhikavaye Muyanti Yatsurayaha.
Tejo Varimritam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Trisargomisha.
Tejo Varimritam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Trisargomisha.
Damna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi.
Damna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi.
O my Lord, Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva.
O my Lord Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva.
O all-pervading personality of Godhead.
O all-pervading personality of Godhead.
Offer my respectful obeisances unto you.
Offer my respectful obeisances.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth.
And the primeval cause of all causes.
And the primeval cause of all causes.
Of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of manifested universes.
Of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him.
And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him.
It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji.
It is only who first imparted Vedic knowledge into the heart of Brahmaji.
The original living being.
The original living being.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
Of water seen on fire or land seen on water.
But water seen the fire of land seen.
Only because of him do the material universes.
Because of him do the material universes.
Temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature.
Temporarily manifested by the action of the modes of nature.
Appear factual, although they are unreal.
Appear factual.
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world.
Forever free from the illusory representation of the material world.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
Dharma projita kaitavotra.
Dharma projita kaitavotra.
Paramo nirmatsaranam satam.
Paramo nirmatsaranam satam.
Vedyam vastavam atra vastu.
Vedyam vastavam atra vastu.
Shivadam tapatrayon mulanam.
Shivadam tapotrayon mulanam.
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite.
Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite.
Kim va purir ishvaraha.
Kim va purir ishvaraha.
Sadyo hridi avurudyate tra.
Sadyo hridi avurudyate tra.
Kriti bihi suhusud subhistakshanat. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. Dhananjaya Prabhu, you want to get my Bhagavad Gita? Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity,
this beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity,
is sufficient in itself for God realization.
It's sufficient in itself for God realization.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other scripture?
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam,
as soon as someone attentively hears
by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
The Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
Nikama kapaturur galitam phalam. Sukumakad amrita dravya samhitam. Thank you. Pibata Bhagavatam rasam malayam. Muhur ahoraska bhuvibhavakaha. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam. The mature fruit of the desired tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful. Although its nectarine juice was already relishable for all,
Studying Jesus was already reachable for all,
including liberated souls.
including liberated souls.
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna,
Shravatam Swakata Krishna,
Punya Shravana Kirtana,
Punya Shravana Kirtana,
Hridyantak Stohi Bhadrani,
Hridyantasto Bhadrani,
Vidunoti Suhitsatam.
Vidunoti Suritsatam.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures,
Hear about Krishna from the Vedic
or to
literature,
hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita,
or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita.
is itself righteous activity.
It is self-righteous activity.
And for one who hears about Krishna,
For one who hears about
Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart,
Lord Krishna is dwelling within everyone's heart,
acts as a best-wishing friend,
acts as a best-wishing
and
friend,
purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him.
and purifies the devotee constantly engaged in hearing him.
Nasta presu bhadresu nityam bhagavata sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Seva,
bhagavati uttamasloke
Uttama Shloke,
bhaktir bhavati naistake. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge.
the devotee naturally develops dormant
As
transcendental.
he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam
As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavad
and from the devotees,
and from the devotees,
he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord.
it's the devotional service to the Lord.
Tadarajastamo bhava kamalobhadayas chaye cheta itara navidam stitvam sattve prasidati. By development of devotional service,
By development of devotional service,
one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance. And thus material lust and avarice are diminished. Evam prasana manaso
Evam Prasanna Manaso,
bhagavad bhakti yogataha bhagavad tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly.
it's the sons of God.
Vidyate hridaya grantis shidyante sarvasamsaya
Shriyante Sarva Samshaya,
siyante jasya karmani
Shyante Chasya Karmani,
justa evat manishvare.
Drusta Ipadmanishvara.
Thus, bhakti yoga severs the hard knot of material affection
That's the Bhakti Yoga serves the heart of the material.
and enables one to come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram,
To come at once to the stage assumption from
understanding of the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead.
understanding the supreme absolute true personality of God.
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna.
Understand the science.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 1, Text 26. Patalam metasyahi padamulam
Patalam etasyahi padamulam,
patanti parsni prapade rasatalam.
Pantati Parshini Prasadi Rasatalam,
Mahatalam vishvashijota gulpo
Mahatalam Visa Sijota Gulpo,
talatalam vai purusasya jange.
Talatalam Vai Purushasya Jangi.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Persons who have realized it have studied that the planets known as Patala constitute the bottoms of the feet of the universal Lord, and the heels and the toes are the Rasatala planets. The ankles are the Mahatala planets, and his shanks constitute the Talatala planets. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Outside the bodily existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the manifested cosmic existence has no reality. Everything and anything of the manifested world rests on him, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 9.4. But that does not imply that everything and anything in the vision of a materialist is the Supreme Personality. the conception of the universal form of the Lord gives a chance to the materialist to think of the Supreme Lord, but the materialist must know for certain that his visualization of the world in a spirit of lording it over it is not God realization. The materialistic view of exploitation of the material resources is occasioned by the illusion of the external energy of the Lord. And as such, if anyone wants to realize the supreme truth by conceiving of the universal form of the Lord, he must cultivate the service attitude. Unless the service attitude is revived, the conception of Virat realization will have very little effect on the seer. The Transcendental Lord, in any conception of his form, is never a part of the material creation. He keeps his identity as Supreme Spirit in all circumstances and is never affected by the three material qualities, for everything material is contaminated. The Lord always exists by his internal energy. The universe is divided into 14 planetary systems, 7 planetary systems called Bur, Bhuvar, Swar, Mahar, Janas, Tapas, and Satya are upward planetary systems, one above the other. There are also 7 planetary systems downward, known as Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala, and Patala, gradually one below the other. In this verse, the description begins from the bottom because it is in the line of devotion that the Lord's bodily description should begin from his feet. Sukadeva Goswami is a recognized devotee of the Lord, and he is exactly correct in the description. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, the very big point made in this purport is that simply looking at material nature does not necessarily mean that you're meditating on God. Because if we look at material nature with the desire to exploit it for our own sense gratification, we don't see anything correctly. Everything we see is wrong. That's called a mistake. Just like you look at your child, or a sane person looks at their child with, let's say, affection and a desire to protect the child. But another person who's a pedophile can look at the same child with the desire to exploit the child for sense gratification. So here, two people are looking at the same thing, but because of the desire of the parent to serve the child, protect the child, and is affectionate toward the child, they're seeing the child as completely different than the pedophile seeing the same child. This is the same thing we're hearing now about how you can meditate on the universal form of God for those people who are very materialistically inclined. And Prabhupada spoke about them some verses before. They're called pantheists. The pantheist believes that the whole material nature is God, or that there are many gods and they're all equal. There are different categories of pantheists. However, the pantheist doesn't mean that they're a pure devotee. They have this vision of God as encompassing everything, or that there are many, many gods. But as long as their desire is to exploit nature for their sense gratification, they're not meditating on God. But another person who, so they would be, let's say, compared to the to the pedophile looking at the child. But another person who meets a devotee or devotees and hears about Krishna, but who still has material desires, such a person is recommended to meditate on the universal form or the Virat Rupa of the Lord, because they have strong material desires. But if the devotees help that person engage in devotional service, like taking prasadam, like seeing the deity in the temple, like taking classes along with devotees, like discover yourself and things like that, then, but still have strong material desires, then it's recommended that they begin their devotional service, or understand, devotional service means understanding Krishna, by meditating on his Virat Rupa. Because they have a natural, let's say, reluctance to accept, or abhorrence, or to accept that Krishna, this little blue boy in Vrindavan, is the personality of Godhead. I once met a lady in France, and I was talking to her about Krishna, and she said, you know, frankly, I have to tell you the truth. I can't accept that God's a little blue boy. Are you kidding? That's not God for me. You know, he's a very stately, elderly gentleman, and he has wisdom. He's not a little young kid or a young teenager. No, I don't accept that. So you see that they accept the idea, like Michelangelo painting God in the 15th century, he painted God as an old man with wrinkles and gray hair. So that just proves that they don't know anything about God. They know something, but it's incomplete. So unless a person gets engaged in some devotional service, even their meditating on the universal form will not work. And that Prabhupada says here, the conception of the universal form of the Lord gives a chance to the materialist to think of the Supreme Lord. But the materialist must know for certain that his visualization of the world in a spirit of lording it over it, is not God realization. The materialistic view of exploitation of the material resources is occasioned by the illusion of the external energy of the Lord. And as such, if anyone wants to realize the supreme truth by conceiving of the universal form of the Lord, he must cultivate the service attitude. So that's what happens when people come in contact with a devotee. The devotee orients them toward engaging in some kind of service for the Lord. And we should be very attentive to this, that when people come to the temple, we should try and engage them in some kind of devotional service. If it's only taking darshan of the deities and taking prasadam, that's a beginning in devotional service. Without engaging in devotional service, no matter what a person does, they won't understand anything about Krishna. They might be a brilliant PhD, they might have 4 or 5 PhDs, and they can write big books, and they can speak nicely, and they can make a lot of money. They won't understand anything unless they get practically engaged in devotional service. So the materialistic view of exploitation of the material resources is occasioned by the illusion of the external energy of the Lord, and as such, if anyone wants to realize the supreme truth by conceiving of the universal form of the Lord, he must cultivate the service attitude. Unless the service attitude is revived, the conception of Virat realization will have very little effect on the seer. So it's not that, oh, okay, well, you still have material desires. Well, you should meditate on the universal form of the Lord. That doesn't mean anything to a person unless they have some devotional service in their life. Because otherwise, they'll look with the mentality of wanting to exploit material nature. And therefore, that's an illusory conception. See, just like the pedophile thinks, unless I can rape this little girl or boy, I won't be happy. Wow, that's an illusion. That's sick, right? And while they still have that thought, they're risking everything in their life. You know, when these pedophiles are caught, you know, and they seize the computer of the pedophile, and it's full of child sex, and and right away they would be prosecuted because that's considered a crime, even to have that type of imagery on your computer, right? So they can be prosecuted for that. So you see, it's not enough just to mechanically say, well, you can meditate on the universal form, that, you know, the soles of the feet of the Lord are patala, and this and that. It won't mean a thing to them unless they have some connection to devotional service. Okay, so this understanding of Krishna is a big subject, and that's why the Srimad Bhagavatam exists. Srimad Bhagavatam, 18 cantos. It took us almost 1 year to read the first canto, right? So theoretically, and then some of the other cantos, like the 10th canto, is much longer than the first canto. So theoretically, if we calculate it, it could take us 24 or 30 years at this pace to read the whole Bhagavatam. And still, we would, it's a wonderful thing to read the whole Bhagavatam, but there would still be much of it that escapes our understanding. So that means we would have to go back and read it again. So this could be many lifetimes. This could be many lifetimes before we actually understand. Even though we're reciting the first mantra in the first canto, in the first chapter, in the first verse, which actually encapsulates the whole understanding of the Bhagavatam. But still, going back is very important because it gives us a chance to understand more deeply what's happening. What's happening is that Vyasadeva, who's an incarnation of Narayana himself, and who is speaking or writing down and speaking the Bhagavatam, did not feel satisfied having written the 4 original Vedas, which he compiled, having written the Puranas, which he compiled, having written the Mahabharata, which he wrote. He compiled certain things, and then he wrote certain things. And then after that, the Vedanta Sutra, which he wrote. And then he felt dissatisfied. And that's a huge amount of literature that he wrote or compiled. And then his guru told him, you're dissatisfied because although you wrote so much, you emphasized more the Varnashram Dharma, but you didn't emphasize who actually is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So people will still be confused. Therefore, you should write the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is uniquely glorifying Lord Krishna, who is the goal of all knowledge and the purpose of the Vedas. So he writes the natural commentary of the Vedanta Sutra and all the Vedas in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam, so that there will be no ambiguity about who's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and there'll be no confusion about how to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You can only understand him through devotional service in the association of pure devotees. And there's something different about Krishna. You see, today, there are many people cheating others into thinking that they are God. There's a whole bunch of people like that in India. And not only in India, all over the world, whether it's in Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, they're pretending to be God or some kind of God figure. And there's thousands of people like that. So people get cheated because they don't understand anything about who is God. So therefore, seeing, when Arjuna asked Krishna to show his Virat Rupa form as the universal form of the Lord, that is to help people who don't know a lot about God, but who can have an immediate litmus test if someone claims to be God. They can immediately say, okay, well, when God appeared 5,000 years ago to Arjuna, Arjuna requested him to manifest his universal form, encompassing all past, present, and future, and everything in the whole universe. So, therefore, I'm going to humbly ask you, if you are God, then show me your universal form. You say. So that's a litmus test. That's immediate test to see if this person is real or a rascal. Obviously, they're not going to be able to do it. And that saves a person a lot of time, trouble, and misery. Because if you accept someone who's not God, and you think that they are God, and you spend years serving that person, and eventually you find out it's a rascal. It's not God. It's the blue jackal, as they say. There's a story of the blue jackal. A fox fell into a vat of blue color. And when he got out of the color, he was all blue. So he went around in the jungle telling the other animals, I'm actually God. And they believed him because they never saw a blue jackal before. And they started worshiping him. And then one night, a group of jackals were in the distance and they were howling. And the jackal heard them. The jackal, so-called God, heard them. And he started howling like a jackal. And then the other animals realized, wait a minute, this is not God. This is an ordinary jackal. And they started to run after him to kill him, you know. So you see, there are many blue jackals in this world today. And because people are so ignorant, they don't understand anything about who Krishna is, although all the information is available. But they want to be, you know, Microsoft certified, Amazon certified, you know, Oracle certified, you know. So they spend all their time reading those books, and they ignore Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. So there are two things that are extremely like indicative criterion to understand who is God. And one is avidya, and the other is swarat. Now, what does that mean? Avidya means that, and these two words are mentioned in the first mantra of the Srimad Bhagavatam, where it's in the first line, Janmadasya yata nivya itaratas chartesu avidya swarat. Avidya means that the Supreme Personality of God has all knowledge. And swarat means it's completely independent. It doesn't need anyone or anything else. Everything is included in him. So these two words distinguish the Supreme Lord from all other living entities. No other living entity is either avidya or swarat. That is, no one is either fully cognizant or fully independent. Even Brahma has to meditate upon the Supreme Lord in order to create. Then what to speak of great scientists like Einstein? The brains of such a scientist are certainly not the products of any human being. Scientists cannot manufacture such a brain, and what to speak of foolish atheists who defy the authority of the Lord. Even Mayavadi impersonalists who flatter themselves that they have become one with the Lord are neither avidya nor swarat. Such impersonalists undergo severe austerities to acquire knowledge, to become one with the Lord. But ultimately they become dependent on some rich disciple who supplies them with money to build monasteries and temples. Atheists, like Ravana or Hiranyakashipu, had to undergo severe penances before they could flout the authority of the Lord. So they were worshiping Lord Brahma or Lord Shiva to get power. They didn't want to go to Lord Vishnu because they wanted to kill Lord Vishnu. So they went to Brahma or Shiva. But ultimately, they were rendered helpless and could not save themselves when the Lord appeared before them as cruel death. So you see, these pastimes of the Lord are very important. His pastime with Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, his pastime as Lord Rama with Ravana, and so forth. It was throughout history. Prahlad Maharaj with his father, so all these histories have the same theme, that these apparently invincible demons are fallible. They're going to be defeated by the Lord. It's just a question of time. And either the Lord is going to defeat them or the Lord's devotee is going to defeat them. Because they're not independent. They are dependent also. But they don't depend on the Lord. They depend on some demigod, or they depend on themselves, and they're defeated. Whereas the devotee depends completely on the Lord, and therefore the devotee is protected by the Lord. So such impersonalists undergo severe austerities to acquire knowledge or to become one with the Lord. But ultimately they become dependent on some rich disciple who supplies them with money to build monasteries and temples. Atheists like Ravana and Hiranyakashipu had to undergo severe penances before they could flout the authority of the Lord. In other words, challenge. But ultimately, they were rendered helpless and could not save themselves when the Lord appeared before them as cruel death. This is also the case with the modern atheists, who also dare to flout or to basically oppose or destroy, try to destroy the authority of the Lord. Such atheists will be dealt with similarly, for history repeats itself. Whenever men neglect the authority of the Lord, nature and her laws are there to penalize them. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita in the well-known verse, Yada yada hi dharmasya, glanir bhavati bharata. Whenever there is a decline of dharma and a concomitant rise of adharma, O Arjuna, then I incarnate myself. Bhagavad Gita 4:7. So we see Krishna incarnated as Varaha and defeated Hiranyaksha. He incarnated as Nrsingadev and defeated Hiranyakashipu. He appeared as Ramana and defeated Rama and defeated Ravana, and so forth. The Lord will come, or he'll send his devotee, and then the impostor is defeated. So Prabhupada continues, he says, that the Supreme Lord is all perfect is confirmed in all Shruti mantras. It is said in Shruti mantras that the all-perfect Lord threw a glance over matter and thus created all living beings. So the living beings are parts and parcels of the Lord, and he impregnates the vast material creation with seeds of spiritual sparks. And thus the creative energies are set in motion to enact so many wonderful creations. An atheist may argue that God is no more expert than a watchmaker, but of course God is greater because he can create machines in duplicate male and female forms. The male and female forms of different types of machineries go on producing innumerable similar machines without God's further attention. If a man could manufacture such a set of machines that could produce other machines without his intention, then he could approach the intelligence of God, but that is not possible. Of course, the scientists are trying to do it. That is, in other words, they want to make the machines independent of man, so the machines proliferate themselves without man's intervention. Just like, Tesla says, we came out with a self-driving car. You can just go to sleep like that and snore or watch television, and your car will drive itself. Do you believe it? Is it possible? No, it's not possible. Otherwise, they'd be driving around right now, everybody. You see, every time they put it on autopilot and go to sleep, there's an accident. And therefore, they haven't put the cars out with absolute safety that it'll drive and you won't have an accident. They can't guarantee that. Every time they put the car out, self-driving, and the people, it's only self-driving like on a straight road, like a highway, where there's less chance of having an accident. But in the city, it doesn't work. There'll be an accident if the person is asleep or not paying any attention. So you see this, and then the car cannot produce itself, cannot produce another car by itself, or the watch, the perfect watch cannot produce another watch. So Krishna, to be able to be God, you have to be able to create self-sufficient unities that are self-perpetuating. And that is not possible. For each machine has to be handled individually. Therefore, no one can create as well as God. Another name for God is Asamodra, which means that no one is equal or greater than him. Param Satyam, or the Supreme Truth, is he who has no equal or superior. This is confirmed in the Shruti mantras. Shruti means what has been heard from an authority, right? It is said that before the creation of the material universe, there existed the Lord only, who is master of everyone. That Lord instructed Brahma in Vedic knowledge. That Lord has to be obeyed in all respects. Anyone who wants to get rid of the material entanglement must surrender unto him. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Unless one surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, it is certain that he will be bewildered. When an intelligent man surrenders unto the lotus feet of Krishna and knows completely that Krishna is the cause of all causes, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, then only can such an intelligent man become a Mahatma, or great soul. But such a great soul is rarely seen. Only the Mahatmas can understand that the Supreme Lord is the primeval cause of all creations. He is Parama, or ultimate truth, because all other truths are relative to him. He is omniscient. For him, there is no illusion. So this first verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the purport to that first verse contains the kernel of truth that's going to be expanded in the rest of the Bhagavatam, but everything is right there in this first verse and the first purport. Then Prabhupada continues and he says that in the Padma Purana also there is reference to the Bhagavatam in a conversation between Gautama and Maharaj Ambarisha. The king was advised therein to read regularly Srimad Bhagavatam if he desired liberation from material bondage. Under the circumstances, there's no doubt about the authority of the Bhagavatam. Within the past 500 years, many erudite scholars and acharyas like Jiva Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Vishwanatha Chakravarti, Vallabhacharya, and many other distinguished scholars, even after the time of Lord Chaitanya, made elaborate commentaries on the Bhagavatam, and a serious student would do well to attempt to go through them to better relish the transcendental messages. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur specifically deals with the original and pure sex psychology, Adi Rasa, devoid of all mundane inebriety or intoxication. The whole material creation is moving under the principle of sex life. In modern civilization, sex life is the focal point for all activities. Wherever one turns his face, he sees sex life predominant. Therefore, sex life is not unreal. Its reality is experienced in the spiritual world. The material sex life is but a perverted reflection of the original fact. The original fact is in the absolute truth, and thus the absolute truth cannot be impersonal. It is not possible to be impersonal and contain pure sex life. Consequently, the impersonalist philosophers have given indirect impetus to the abominable mundane sex life because they have overstressed the impersonality of the absolute truth. What does this mean? This is one sentence. Let's analyze this sentence. It says, the original fact is in the absolute truth, and thus the absolute truth cannot be impersonal. Then it says, it is not possible to be impersonal and contain pure sex life. Consequently, the impersonalist philosophers have given indirect impetus, in other words, indirect force or indirect importance, indirect impetus to the abominable mundane sex life because they have overstressed the impersonality of the absolute truth. Consequently, man without information of the actual spiritual form of sex has accepted perverted material sex life as the all-in-all. There is a distinction between sex life in the diseased material condition and spiritual sex life. So here we're talking now about Madhurya Rasa, this transcendental state of pure love of the Lord, and which is experienced by the gopis, and especially Srimati Radharani. But there's no mundane sex involved. And that's very hard for people to understand. Why is it so hard for people to understand? Because the impersonality of God is so strongly emphasized today, whether it's in Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, or just atheism. The impersonality of God is so strongly emphasized that people turn to mundane sex and think that that is the highest pleasure in it, because they have no information of the personality of Godhead and of the nature of transcendental sex life in the spiritual world. This is a big topic, and therefore Prabhupada concludes by saying, this Srimad Bhagavatam will gradually elevate the unbiased reader to the highest professional stage of transcendence. It will enable him to transcend the three modes of material activities, fruitive actions, speculative philosophy, and worship of functional deities as inculcated in Vedic verses. So, what you should do is read this last two paragraphs of Canto 1, Chapter 1, Verse 1, or Text 1. Just the last two, the last two paragraphs of that purport. And try and understand what it's saying. It's actually extremely profound. And if you can write something about what you think, what you've understood by reading this, it would be very good. And we can read it. You can read it tomorrow. Try and write something from what you've understood from these two paragraphs, the last two paragraphs of the purport of the first canto, first chapter, first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Are there any questions? Yes.
Harivilas Maharaj. So in this verse, in the last part, we see that about the patalas, the lower planets, created from the feet of Krishna, Lord Krishna, right?
Yes.
So actually, Krishna's body.
Created. Okay, they are created. Go ahead.
I mean, that's what the last part
Yes.
of what I was explaining about it. Like,
Yes.
So, but we see Maharaj, like, as Lord Krishna's whole body is, equal. It's not, there is nothing a lower or, I mean, you cannot differentiate.
No one is equal or greater than
Yeah,
the
they
Lord.
are equal, right? There is nothing like inferior or superior or anything for Krishna's body. So, but when we talk about
Wait a
the
minute, I
planets,
didn't understand what you just said.
so other Krishna's
Krishna is
Krishna.
asamurdva. That means there's no one equal to him or greater than him.
No, I'm not comparing with the other people, but Krishna itself, the body, whole Krishna's body is seems to be anything, like any organ of his, like upper part or hands or limbs or anything should be at the same level, right? As a body, you cannot have the, okay, legs are, so it is inferior, body, head is superior, or
Okay,
something
no,
like that.
There are two things. You have to not mix them up. Krishna's transcendental body, Satchitananda Vigraha, right, is different than the Virat Rupa. Virat Rupa is material.
Mm-hmm.
Krishna's transcendental body is not material.
Okay.
That's
So-
why for materialists, it's recommended that they meditate on the Virat Rupa, because they only accept matter as existing. They don't accept that there's something spiritual. So here we have Krishna, who has a universal form that encompasses the whole universe and has past, present, and future in it at one time. And a materialist can meditate on that and gradually be elevated to the personal concept of Krishna.
Yeah.
See, right now they don't see a person. They're atheists, so they reject the personality of Krishna. But they can gradually come to understand the personality of Krishna by beginning with meditating on the Virat Rupa.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that Krishna's transcendental body has some parts of it that are material. See, don't mix the two things up. Virat Rupa is a form of Krishna, but in the material world. It doesn't exist in the spiritual world.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yeah, when the spiritual world disappears, the Virat Rupa also disappears.
Yeah.
Right. But Krishna's transcendental body is always existing. It never disappears. It never. We might not see it, but it's going on full steam in the spiritual world, right? But for those people who are materialists, it's recommended that they meditate on the universal form, or the Virat Rupa, because it's a material form, and they only want to deal with matter.